All right, let's expand more on this and welcome the Chief Electoral Officer of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Mamabolo. Mr. Mamabolo, thank you so much for your time. So before we get into issues of e-voting, perhaps let's engage you on the IEC's preparations ahead of the local government elections. No clear date at this stage.
Not clear date at this stage, and the determination of the date is within the remit of the Minister of Culture. He does so having consulted with the Commission, and we can indicate that preliminary consultations have commenced, but I think we're still a little bit a distance away from him finalizing the election date.
Yeah, and I want to engage you then on the comments that you made around electronic voting. In terms of e-voting and following the conference you held around it, what are the key challenges, do you think, that are preventing us from moving from paper-based elections to electronic in 2026 perhaps, or even 2029? What would that mean? Would it mean overhauling the entire electoral system?
Oh, of course, certainly. We firstly have got to go through the national conversation that is currently unfolding in terms of the discussion paper that the Commission proposed. And that discussion paper traverses a number of elements. For instance, what are the constitutional and legal framework that will be required for electronic voting? Two, what is the international practice actually says about e-voting? There are countries in the world that have gone through an e-voting system and then reversed that process, and there are those who are still using electronic voting. So lessons from those types of experiences are part of the discussion document. We also got to navigate the space related to living with disabilities, such as blind persons and so on. How are they going to interface with any electronic form of voting? And lastly, as South Africa, we remain a country of uneven development. The digital economy is not distributed evenly across the country. So we've got to deal with those issues, and the discussion document addresses that. But the idea really is to allow for this broad discussion, a broad consultation, and 6 months is given for that purpose, and after which the Commission will finalize its paper, which will then be presented to Parliament for its consideration. Of course, ultimately, it is Parliament that will determine national policy on voting and its related aspects.
And I mean, I just want to touch on this one thing in terms of that conference that you held. You obviously invited a number of countries in terms of, just global comparisons. What lessons are you taking out of those countries with similar socio-economic and perhaps even digital infrastructure challenges to ours, and how they've been able to successfully implement then electoral voting, notwithstanding, of course, the issues here in South Africa of digital divide, access, etc., and even security issues?
Yes, I think all international experience says the following things. Firstly, there has to be trust in the system. So in implementing any form of electronic voting, you have to carry the whole country with you, both political parties and broader civil society. Secondly, electronic voting ought to make you efficient. So you're not implementing it for the sake of it, but it has to resolve institutionalized challenges of the country. And then thirdly, that electronic voting does not in and of itself promote improved turnout. There are factors that really addresses the issue of turnout. Changing the voting modality in and of itself does not guarantee you improved turnout. And lastly, that electronic voting, at least in the initial stage, will not make elections cheaper because of the inherent capital investment that goes with introducing an electronic voting mechanic of that nature.
I want to touch again on, the local government elections. Next year's local government elections, we've been saying, of course, could be between the 2nd of November and the 30th of January 2027. So as you go into, the preparation and the planning as the IEC, and when you consider last year's general elections, what are your key takeaways, given just the amount of criticism that had been leveled against the IEC from voter management devices and other system failures at some stations?
No, there are important takeaways, certainly, from the 2024 elections. Primary among that is the fact that the legislative basis for an election has to be settled well in advance. It is not helpful to be in court 6 months before an election on a case that has implications for the systems that you need in order to run an election. I think that issue is critical. But with that goes the fact that independent testing of applications becomes necessary so that the robustness of our applications can be verified and assessed independently to ensure that they are suitable for the types of conditions that will prevail on election day. And lastly, that with the advent of social media and its levels of penetration, that we've got to deal better with the notion of mis and disinformation, because the credibility of the electoral process gets impaired of disinformation and misinformation. So we need to better deal with that space.
Yeah.
As much as it is a useful tool, social, very important tool, easy to use, cheap to use, but it does mean we've got to be prepared to deal with it in a better way.
Very quickly, before I let you go, Mr. Mamabolo, in today's briefing that we played earlier, you emphasized how important the youth vote is, and you have referenced the latest stats around, the youth and who could but has not registered to vote. The concern then is that the rate of the youth registration has not kept pace with the youth's growth, which I think you quoted it sitting at 27 million. I mean, how concerned then are you about that fact, and what changes do you think need to be made?
Look, any society, democracy will decay if there's no renewal of the voters' roll by the entrance of young persons into the voters' roll. So, which is why we are already indicating that we've been to at least 400 high schools just in the month of April, and we will be escalating this for the rest of the year to engage young persons around civic responsibility and the need to vote. But coupled with that is our program in tertiary institutions as well as TVET colleges. These are institutions where the bulk of the youth are to be found. And these are future leaders, so we've got to engage them with their civic responsibility and nudge them, as it were, to register and be on the voters' roll.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time. Of course, I'm sure we'll be having many interviews following this press briefing of yours ahead of those elections. Thank you so much for your time. That is the Chief Electoral Officer of the Electoral Commission, Mr. Mamabolo.